So far, we've looked at two warrior men from Native American history, but today, we'll look at a woman who sought to unify her own tribe and the white invaders through peace instead of violence. Pocahontas was the daughter of Chief Powhatan, a highly respected figure of authority within Seneca, an area that encompassed areas in Virginia. Her mother, however, is not known, though it's understood that she was likely of a low status. In fact, a common tradition that would take place amongst Powhatan's tribe, as recorded by the colonist Henry Spelman, was that when a chief's wife gave birth to a child, the mother would simply be disregarded. The chief would still support her by providing her with necessary resources, but he would not be her spouse, or even a mate for that matter. Instead, this woman would be urged to find herself another husband, so that the chief would be allowed to relinquish the responsibility of having to provide for her. This idea implies that when Pocahontas was born, she was taken away from her mother by Chief Powhatan, who in a sense swiped left on Pocahontas' mother and forgot all about her. Another theory has it that Pocahontas' mother died during childbirth. Others believe that Pocahontas' mother was the wife of Chief Powhatan, and that Pocahontas was named after her. While on the subject of her name, others such as the colonist William Strachey state that Pocahontas was merely a childhood nickname, some interpreting it to mean the playful one. William Steiff, an 18th century historian, believed that her real name was actually Matokes, and that the natives changed her name to Pocahontas out of superstitious fear that if the white colonists didn't know her real name, then they could do her no harm. According to an anthropologist named Helen Roundtree, Pocahontas only revealed her name to the English once she had taken up her baptismal name, Rebecca, when she converted to Christianity, but we'll speak more on that later. One of the most famous events in Pocahontas' life is her meeting with Captain John Smith, a colonist from England, who arrived in Virginia with 100 other settlers in April 1607 by order of the London Company. The London Company was a stock company whose intention was to develop the English strongholds on native soil. The English had many hostile engagements with the people of Seneca, though it's unfair to say that they always ended in conflict. It wasn't until December in 1607 was John Smith captured by a hunting party led by Chief Powhatan's young brother and brought to the capital at Werowocomoco. Smith would explain in a letter to Queen Anne years later that his capture was sure to end with his death. Supposedly, 2 large stones were brought before Chief Powhatan, and Smith was placed up against one of them as the natives gathered round. With clubs, they intended to beat the brains out of him. However, before they could, Pocahontas threw herself in front of him and placed her own head against his, defying her father and insisting on a peaceful resolution. Struck by his daughter's bravery, Chief Powhatan honoured her conviction and let Smith live. Pocahontas was said to befriend John Smith and would often visit the colonists to play games. It's said that when the colonists were hungry, Pocahontas and her attendants would bring them food, so much food that it would save the lives of those that would have died from hunger. There was generally good peace and good vibes between the two people, courtesy of Pocahontas, serving as a conduit between both sides. But soon, Powhatan felt like their lands were being threatened with the colonist expansion, and so conflicts arose again. In one skirmish, John Smith suffered from a gunpowder explosion that forced him to return to England for medical care. The remaining colonists assumed that he wouldn't survive his injuries, and so they told the Powhatans that Smith was indeed dead. Pocahontas, who believed this account, was deeply saddened and thus stopped visiting the colonists. In the late summer of 1609, Pocahontas would be captured by the English in a conflict between the settlers and the natives. In fact, it's noted that Pocahontas herself was tricked on board the Englishman's ship and held for ransom against her father and chief, Powhatan. Fearing for his daughter's safety, Powhatan returned the English prisoners he had captured in the earlier conflict, as well as weapons and tools the natives had gotten their hands on. But this offer failed to satisfy the colonists, who wanted more. To this end, they kept Pocahontas captive for an entire year at Chesterfield County, Virginia. There are 2 accounts as to what life for Pocahontas was like at Chesterfield County. Many historians believe that she was treated with courtesy by the English. However, an oral tale speaks of how Pocahontas was mistreated and raped by the colonists. However, this is disputed by historians, for this would have gone against their intentions to make a deal with Powhatan. Besides, the natives did in fact outnumber the English, so they didn't want to do anything that would warrant a retaliation. It was here though that Minister Alexander Whitaker taught Pocahontas about Christianity and helped her improve her English. Upon her baptism, she would abandon the name Pocahontas and took the name Rebecca. In March 1614, a whole 5 years after her capture, a violent confrontation took place between the English and Powhatan's men. At Powhatan's capital though, some of the English were allowed entry to conduct peace negotiations with senior natives. They brought Pocahontas with them so that she may translate for them. However, when her father Powhatan arrived, Pocahontas reportedly accused him of valuing her less than swords and axes, and that she actually preferred living with the English because they actually loved her. Speaking of love, it's with these colonists that Pocahontas met a settler named John Rolfe, a man who is credited with successfully cultivating a new strain of tobacco. John Rolfe was described as being a pious man, and he was troubled by the moral repercussions of marrying someone like Pocahontas, someone foreign and so unlike anything he'd ever known. Though since she had become a Christian, and was now using the name Rebecca, it was enough for Rolfe to pen a letter to the governor requesting permission to marry her. He stated in his letter that he would be saving her soul, and that he wasn't marrying her because of his own desires or affections, but merely for the good of the plantation, for the honour of England, and for the glory of God, and mainly for her own salvation. It wasn't because he totally fancied her. Definitely not. It's unknown how Pocahontas even felt towards John Rolfe, but either way, the pair were married on April 5th, 1614, at Jamestown, where they lived for 2 years. They also had a son named Thomas. It was this marriage that created a climate of peace between English colonists and Powhatan's tribes. One of the main goals of the London Company was to convert as many Native Americans to Christianity as they possibly could. With the conversion of Pocahontas and her marriage to an Englishman, the company saw it as an opportunity to promote investment. After all, it was this one singular marriage that had brought an end to the conflict. The company brought Pocahontas to England to show the rest of the country that the native savages could indeed be tamed, and that the colonization of Virginia had been a massive success. John Smith, who you'll remember as the chap from earlier whose life was saved by Pocahontas, reportedly wrote to Queen Anne of England urging her to treat Pocahontas with respect and as a royal visitor. His idea was that if she was treated badly, then all the love and peace that she had invested into the colonists would turn to scorn and fury, and that if this was the case, then England would lose an opportunity to gain a foothold in Powhatan territory. Pocahontas was entertained at various social gatherings, going on to meet some of the country's most important people, including King James himself. Sources also indicate that she was addressed as a princess, despite this not necessarily being the case in Powhatan culture. Many of the English at the time recognised Powhatan as a ruler of an empire, and thus considered his daughter with the appropriate status. She was treated well in London as well, and even met with John King, the Bishop of London, who was said to be entertained and enthralled by her, something that was considerably out of his character. But of course, not all of the English were impressed by Pocahontas, as according to Helen C. Rowntree, there isn't any evidence to suggest that Pocahontas was considered as royalty at all. She goes on to say that Pocahontas may have just been a curiosity to the English people, and would simply regard her as the Virginian woman. In March 1617, Pocahontas and Rolfe boarded a ship to return home to Virginia. However, they would only make it as far as the River Thames, for Pocahontas was said to become gravely ill. She was taken ashore and soon died at the very young age of 21. It's not known what caused her death, but some theories range from pneumonia, smallpox, tuberculosis, or even perhaps poison. According to Rolfe, her final words were that all must die, but that it was enough that her child would live on. If you enjoyed this video, then don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. There's also a Twitter page which I often update with news from the channel, so be sure to follow there as well. Until the next time guys.